Hello and welcome to the Why Am I Sick podcast with me, Ananya Rao-Middleton, your host. Now, the Why Am I Sick podcast is a podcast that's dedicated towards helping you uncover the reasons and the root causes behind your illness. And I want to help you to figure out what's going on in your body because I believe that that is the best way that we can empower ourselves to be able to heal. Our bodies want to heal, and sometimes it's just about figuring out what is going on internally on a cellular level, following the science, and then figuring out how can I empower my own body to heal. This podcast is based on my journey with chronic illness, having been diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis, when I was 25 years old, and post-concussion syndrome when I was also 25, and how I've managed to reverse both of those chronic conditions. It's not magic, it's all rooted in science. And this podcast is aiming to help you to distill all the knowledge, all the misinformation, all the stuff online into relatable, understandable, bite-sized pieces that will help you to be able to make actionable change in your own body without having to buy anything too expensive and just changing up your routine in your day-to-day life. So, without further ado, this is our first episode, and I want to just give you a quick tour of my own journey with chronic illness, because that's how this all started. The reason why I wanted to start this podcast in the first place is because I have been where you are. I have been newly diagnosed. I've been utterly terrified of what is happening in my body. I have felt incredibly disempowered, not knowing why this is happening to me, and also not getting the answers from my doctors that I hope would help explain why I've been diagnosed in the first place. And I understand how frustrating, how confusing, and also how scary that is. I also understand that there is a ton of information out there on the internet, and it can feel like you are just wading through water, endless water, trying to figure out what's real, what's legit, what's misinformation, what's like woo-woo, and I get that in and of itself can be exhausting. It's exhausting. And managing a chronic illness or multiple chronic illnesses on top of trying to figure all of that out, Nah, it's not a vibe. And I've been there. I've been doing that for the past 7-8 years since I was diagnosed. And I've waded through all the things. I've figured out what works. And ultimately, we're going to talk about science here, because that's what really matters, is connecting what is happening on our body to basic biology, to understanding what is happening at a cellular level, and then ultimately empowering ourselves to make easy, actionable, and affordable lifestyle and diet changes that can make a huge difference in our quality of lives. Because the important thing that I learned over the past couple of years is one fundamental truth about the human body, including yours and mine, is that the body wants to heal. When we develop a chronic illness, that is our body saying, yo, some shit is really going down in here, and I'm trying to protect you from all the stuff that's going on. And so I'm going to be giving you all these symptoms. I am sounding the alarms. But actually, and one thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is that often there are things that have happened way before the diagnosis, for years and years and years, of your body whispering to you about what's happening, that something is not quite right. And in this podcast series, I want to take you on a journey of understanding what those kind of build-up symptoms are, what your body is trying to tell you, why this has happened to you. Because ultimately, if we're able to understand why these things have happened to us, why we've developed chronic illness, we are then able to take action to encourage our bodies to go through that healing process. And it's completely possible. I think what's really invalidating and what's really frustrating, especially when dealing with medical professionals and doctors, and that's not to say all of them, sadly, it seems to be a lot of them though, let's be real, is that they often are not providing solutions to what's happening to us. They are not explaining the science, the biology of the root causes of your disease. Instead, what we often get from doctors is, okay, this is the medication I'm going to give you. It's going to stop the symptoms. What I want to focus on is not just stopping the symptoms, but stopping the disease and the underlying issues from happening in the first place. Because stopping symptoms doesn't stop the progression of the thing that's happening in your body, right? It's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on something that's just pouring and being like, this is good, this is enough. It's not enough. And if you took that bandage off or that Band-Aid off, Band-Aid's an American word. I don't know why I'm saying that. Plaster is the British word. We are British here. No. But it's not going to work, right? Like we need to figure out, okay, what's causing the bleeding? What is the knife that's being twisted into us that's causing the bleeding? How do we remove the knife? You know? And so this podcast will walk us through all those things. I'm going to get some really interesting people on the podcast to talk through all of the kind of questions that you might have around your body, around what inflammation is, which is like something that I'm sure that you've heard of, but might kind of not really understand what it means. And all the other things that you might have encountered on your journey with trying to figure out what's going on with your body. And I think the important thing for me to say here as well is that this podcast is not aimed at one condition specifically. What I want to say is that there are underlying truths and principles to how our bodies work that affect all of us who have been diagnosed with chronic conditions. So my focus is on those fundamental root causes that everyone can relate to, and importantly, that we can all start to address to make incremental improvements in our well-being and our health. So this is something that I've tried on myself for multiple years. I've gone through all the things on the internet. I have followed the science. I've read papers. I've followed instruction from doctors such as Dr. Terry Wahls, and we'll get on to her in a minute. And also other patients, other people who have had chronic illnesses, gotten curious with their bodies and made really interesting and amazing changes that have got them their health back. And I'm really proud. I'm proud of myself. I am proud to say that I've gotten my health back. I went from being so sick in my early 20s and in my late teens to being able to do all the things now. And what does that look like? I'm going to give you a little tour of who I am, because I'm sure many of you might not know me, and I want you to get to know me. And I also want to get to know you guys too. I want to create a space of community. I'm going to be your big sister in this crazy, wild journey of chronic illness, provide hopefully some relatable content, some tips, some tricks, and also, most importantly, just a little bit of grounding in understanding yourself and your body so that you feel empowered and you feel confident going forward in being able to do things that will make a real change in your life, a positive change in your health. So, a little bit about me. I am 32. I have a bunch of grey hair. I have lived in a lot of different places in the UK. I was born in London, and then I moved to the Isle of Wight in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a village. And related to health, I've always kind of struggled. I've just, I felt like a bit of a slug, a bit of a snail in health stuff. I noticed from a really young age, as soon as I hit puberty, shit really hit the fan. Like, my periods were so heavy, so heavy. I had to leave school for an afternoon every month from the age of 12 because my period was so heavy and it was so painful. I literally could not sit in a lesson. And I feel like the reception staff at my school thought I was just taking the piss every month. They look at me like, "Are you sure a paracetamol is not going to help you?" Lady, no. Paracetamol did not cut it. Paracetamol did not make a dent in this pain. So I would have to take the day off, go home, and just die on the sofa for the rest of the day. And I'm sure so many of you can relate to that because let's be real, painful periods and heavy periods very much the norm. And that's what I was told. This is normal. This is what a lot of people in your family go through. This is what my mum would say through no fault of her own, right? Because she was told the same thing. This is what the Rows go through. My sister went through the same. Da 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 da. So I was like, okay, I've just inherited these terrible, terrible periods. This experience is awful. But then I noticed that not everyone had that. Some people had periods that just flew by, like really easy, not so much blood, no pain. I was like, that's weird. That's annoying. I'm frustrated. I wish I had that. But, there we go. So there was that. Then there was also the fact that alongside that, I noticed that my weight would just really fluctuate. And I definitely grew up in that awful period of time where there was so much pressure on girls to be really skinny. Like it was that era of mums who ate rice crackers and a cucumber and would be like, this is a substantial lunch. So yeah, I grew up sadly with a lot of that around me, a lot of management around my body, around my weight. But I noticed that I really, really struggled with that. And it not just impacted my self-esteem, but it also contributed very much to bad mental health. I really struggled with a lot of depression and anxiety. I was just not feeling great about myself. And I was like, hang on. What is this bare injustice that this girl next to me can be eating double what I eat, all the sweets and the sugar in the world. And in general, my diet was, classic British diet, let's be real. We were just getting beige food at school, so not working with good things. But at home, my parents are very, very good chefs. My mum was actually literally a chef at the time. And we had a lot of Indian food. We had a lot of vegetables, a lot of meat, a lot of whole food. And in spite of that, I still could not maintain a weight that, the next girl across who was far, far skinnier than me was eating like double, eating all the sweets. And if I ate like her, my days, like my weight would be fluctuating so much. So it was very confusing. And I guess a little trigger warning here for anyone with eating disorders is that at that time I also developed an eating disorder because of all the pressure of all those things, girlhood, and the pressure to be small, the pressure to fit myself into a little box and apologize for this body that I have. And I'm a tall girly. I'm like 5'10", which is 178 centimeters. And, I do a lot of sports nowadays, big up Muay Thai. So, yeah, I was trying to shrink myself always. And that really lent into very, very, very poor mental health. It was not great. I took that with me to university. And by this time I moved off the Isle of Wight because there are no universities there, FYI. It is a very small island. There are cows. Anyways, so I moved back to London for university. I went to Goldsmiths. I met my best friend there. Shout out to Naomi. She is my ride or die. And I lived in the grossest, moldiest apartment ever. And I didn't realize that this is part of my health story. And I'm deliberately talking about all of these things that just seem like features of many of our lives, right? Like, yeah, of course, I've lived in the moldy flat. Yeah, I had anxiety growing up. I also struggled with my weight. I also had heavy periods. There is a reason I'm talking about this right now. And it all leans into why I was diagnosed with chronic illnesses in my mid-20s, right? So, lived in the moldy student flat, was not a great time. My anxiety like quadrupled. I could not sleep. I had the worst panic attacks. Like it just felt like I was in constant danger. My body was so hyper vigilant all the time. And even though I was having fun, obviously I was living with my best friend, so how could I not have fun? But there was just something really, really, really wrong with my mental health. And at this time, I was still, doing broadly the same things as everyone else. I drink occasionally. I was eating like a lot of pasta and student-y food and all this kind of stuff. Just normal stuff that we all have done. And what I realized when I left university and hit around 23, 24, I started to really get interested in weightlifting and sport. I'd always been a bit into martial arts. My dad put me in Kung Fu when I was really young. So I got back into that. I was like, okay, I'm going to get into MMA. We're going to get strong. We are going to fight some people. And that's what I did when I was around 24. I got into MMA and I was obsessed. It was so good. So good. And I realized at this time I had also completely changed my diet. And this was not with any kind of deep knowledge around chronic illness. What I knew was that there was this thing called the keto diet, the ketogenic diet, that again my dad had introduced me to because he at that time was a prolific runner, and this was something that he had found to be really helping him with his running. And when I transitioned into a ketogenic diet and I entered into ketosis, and we'll go more into the ketogenic diet in another episode in more detail, but essentially you change the system that your body uses to make energy. So where your body would previously use glucose for energy through carbohydrates, aka sugars, your body then transitions to making energy from ketones instead. And immediately, I felt the biggest shift in my mental health. And the wildest thing is that since I changed my diet, in very fundamental ways, this isn't even like the bigger shifts that I made after being diagnosed with chronic illnesses and all the things. This is something that I started in my early 20s. So I cut out gluten, I cut out high carb foods, I cut out processed foods. Those are the main three things that I did. And just from doing that, my depression vanished. And I don't say that lightly, because when I say that I was depressed, I really mean I was very, 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 very depressed. And I never experienced that again. And even though I've been through objectively difficult moments in my life, I have never hit the rock bottom of the depression that I experienced when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. So already these kind of little tweaks to my diet, going into ketosis and cutting out processed food and gluten, made a tremendous difference to my mental health. So at this time I was like, I'm an athlete. I was doing MMA. Then I became obsessed with jiu-jitsu. I was competing. I was weightlifting. I felt so strong. I was like, I could take over the world. It was great. All the while, like kind of doing a random soul destroying job in London as a consultant. But things felt really, really good. I was just really obsessed with sport. I was loving martial arts. I was getting so nerdy about jiu-jitsu. I also low-key just loved when big guys would come to the gym, see me as a woman and be like, I'm going to choke her out. And I was like, no, I'm going to choke you out. And I would. And it was great. So really living it up. And then this is where everything in my life changed quite radically. When I was 25, I was working at this consultancy, remember? And we had one of those annoying team days out where they're like, we're going to force you to have fun together so that you can be a better team. And one of those forced fun activities included go-karting. And I didn't realize how competitive my team was, right? Mostly guys, and they were all working on accounts in this consultancy to do with cars. So obviously very interested in cars and stuff, the cars and stuff. You can see how I have no idea. But it got very competitive in go-karting, and I ended up in a position where, in go-karting, they have a traffic light system akin to normal driving on regular roads. And one of my colleagues ignored the fact that the lights had turned red, which indicates to stop. And he went straight into the back of my go-kart. And I felt the most unimaginable pain shoot up my spine into my head. I can't even describe it. It was so painful. And I say this as someone who has a very high pain threshold from training martial arts. It was unimaginable. And at the time, I didn't really realize what had happened. It really didn't dawn on me that this was like a big life-altering event. So I kind of stumbled out of my go-kart, continued on with the day, with the team building, but I felt really off. I felt hazy. I was drowsy, but no one had explained to me that this could be a brain injury or a concussion. It was only a few days later when I went to my GP that he was like, you're feeling this way because you're concussed. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I could not work. Everything was kind of blurry, lopsided. I was experiencing so much dizziness. And he was like, don't worry, concussions, they take like a month of recovery. Just rest at home. Make sure that you're not alone. And I thought, well, everyone's at work in my household. So maybe I should just go to work then, because I shouldn't be alone, right? So tried to go to work, miserably failed because I was so concussed, ended up staying at home and tried to recover by just resting. It took 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Then suddenly it was months and I was seeing no improvement. In fact, it felt like things were just getting worse and worse and worse for me. And that's because I was given really rudimentary advice around what to do with the concussion, right? Just rest at home. And what I realized was this was not informed advice at all. This is very generic advice that now has been disproven for anyone with a brain injury. And what ended up happening is that actually my concussive symptoms did not go away within a month. And I developed what was then called post-concussion syndrome, which is basically where your concussive symptoms do not go away. And so it becomes a syndrome, something that lasts far longer. And I could not look at my computer. I could not look at my phone. I was essentially just on my sofa all day listening to podcasts because that's all I could do. And I didn't know what to do. So I was determined to find something that would help me recover from this, because the way that my brain works is just I just don't take things lying down. I really, really, really knew that there would be a better way. And what we ended up finding was that there were actually a lot of people who had more robust protocols, especially in the US, around post-concussion syndrome. And a lot of them involved looking at your vestibular system, looking at how was your entire body affected by the event of the brain injury, and how do you rehab all of those things together as like a whole. And so I basically crafted my own rehab program from scratch, not knowing anything, but trying to learn all the things, all while concussed as fuck. And my doctor basically told me to calm down and try and do one thing at a time, and booked in an appointment with the ENT department, which is the eyes, nose and throat. That's it. For an assessment on my vestibular system, but that would be in a year's time. So I could not wait that long. So I diagnosed myself, and don't always recommend doing that, but desperate times call for desperate measures. No one was going to do it for me. So I diagnosed what kind of vestibular issues I have. I happened to be spot on. I rehabbed that at home, and over months, because eventually I couldn't work for around 6 months in total. Over months, I managed to reverse those symptoms. systematically. And that was literally from my own volition, my own curiosity, and my own belief that resting at home was not doing me good. I knew my body. I knew I needed to be strong, maintain my muscle. I was told not to exercise. One of the fundamental things that changed the outcome of my brain injury was going slowly back into exercise and strength training again to make sure that I wasn't getting weak, and also to stabilize my vestibular system. So I did all of those things, and it took me maybe a year and a half in total to be pretty much fully recovered. I would say I'm not the same person as I was before my brain injury, but certainly I don't struggle anymore with symptoms from it. Sadly, a few of my friends still do, but brain injuries are complicated, you know? But that was the first time that I really realized, okay, there are certain things that I can do to support my body with healing. Now, during this time, I was also going through an investigative process with privately, because my GP was not doing anything. And this is where all my savings went at the time. So this is another dimension to chronic illness, right? Is having to pay out of pocket for things to happen quickly. And so I ended up going to a private consultant who is a specialist in concussions for, I think it was the women's rugby team in the UK. She was very cool. Very cool. I wanted to be her friend. So she did an MRI of my brain because she was like, okay, let's rule out any kind of other issues in your brain to make sure that there's nothing underlying here that is perpetuating your post-concussion syndrome and causing it to last for a long time. And through that investigation, I remember the day I walked into her office and she basically ran down the corridor in high heels towards me. And I was like, oh, okay, she's very urgent right now. Let's see what's going on. And she was like, look, Ananya, I need to tell you, with your scan, we actually found lesions in your brain. I was like, what is a lesion? What's a lesion? And she very hastily explained, because she didn't want to scare me, but the haste was scary, that lesions in the brain could indicate that I have multiple sclerosis. I had no idea what multiple sclerosis was, right? Like at the time, no clue. And so this was all very scary, very overwhelming. And she was like, I'm going to send you for further checkups. We're going to get another MRI in a few months. And we are also going to do a lumbar puncture to check the proteins in your spinal fluid to see whether they test positive for MS cytokines. And so I was like, what is happening? This is wild. I didn't expect any of this. I really didn't expect any of this. I am an athlete. I train sports. I do all the things. I look after my health. I think I sleep pretty well. None of this was expected, and it was utterly terrifying. And she just said to me, I remember, do not look up what MS is on Google. That's what she said. And I can completely understand why she said that, but at the same time, it was still really scary. So I didn't look up MS on Google. I tried to not look it up at all until I had received a proper diagnosis, because this was just her kind of drawing that conclusion based on the scan. And lo and behold, a few months later, we went through all the things, the lumbar puncture, which was pretty traumatizing. And I was diagnosed with MS. And that was everything just in my life was flipped upside down in a way that I think my brain injury did do that too. So it was like a double flip. And I just felt so terrified. I had no idea that this was happening inside of me. I didn't know what to look out for. I didn't know why this was happening. I just didn't understand. Why me? Why was this happening to me? What does MS mean? What does it mean for my future? What does it mean for my ability to move? Because what people were telling me is that, okay, so you have MS, it means you're going to get more and more disabled. You're eventually going to be in a wheelchair, and there's nothing that you can do about that trajectory. And that was the most terrifying aspect of my diagnosis for me, was this idea that there was nothing that I could do. And this was repeated to me by all the doctors that I had spoken to in this period of time, including my neurologist who is now looking after me for the MS. And it just felt so wildly disheartening. And I think in that moment, I experienced this very deep sense of knowing that there was another way. I had this fundamental belief instilled in me. I just felt it in my heart and my soul. No, that is not my trajectory. That is not my destiny. That is not my future. And even if that voice in my head was not yet backed up with scientific evidence of knowing that to be true, I just knew it to be true. And I feel like that knowing is what has carried me this far in my journey. It's carried me towards where I am today, to having my MS in remission. And the person who really inspired me after I decided that for myself and looked into what I could do is Dr. Terry Wahls. Dr. Terry Wahls is a doctor herself in the US, and she was actually diagnosed with a form of MS that's really aggressive. It's called primary progressive MS, and it basically means that the inflammation in your brain, the lesions that form, it happens way faster. So it's a really aggressive form of MS that can lead to very fast deterioration, because what happens with MS in particular is that you have lesions that develop in your brain, and depending on where they are in your brain, they affect your body in different ways. So for example, some people with MS lose feeling in their limbs, and that's because the lesion that's developed, which is not just in your brain, it's also in your myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is what connects your nerves. So people with MS often struggle with things like numbness because the MS and the lesions are affecting the nerve transmission in our brains. And so she basically had a huge health decline very, very quickly, was soon in an anti-gravity chair and then completely bedbound. And as a doctor, she felt really frustrated with this, because she was like, okay, I've been to medical school. I feel like I understand how the body works. So why is this happening to me? And why can't I fix it? She was given all the regular MS medication, which is very heavy duty, comes with their own set of symptoms because they're immunosuppressant drugs. And she used the time that she had at home, now bedbound, to basically research and then experiment on herself, which sounds kind of whack, but it's actually not, because what she was looking at were diet and lifestyle changes in accordance with what she was uncovering to be the root causes of MS. Because when you talk about MS with most medical professionals, they tell you, oh, it's a disease where your immune system attacks itself, hence the lesions in your brain. But actually, that's a very narrow way of looking at MS. What is MS really? It's an inflammatory disease. It's indicating that the mitochondria in our cells are not functioning properly. So she was looking at it from a cellular perspective, rooted in the science that she'd learned as a doctor, and was going back to that to help her to understand how to reverse her symptoms. She was asking herself questions like, how can I reduce my inflammation? How can I help my mitochondria to function better so that my cells are functioning better and my immune system functions better? And so from those questions, she was able to craft a plan based on fundamental truths around the human body in terms of nutrition, in terms of what the body needs, to then reverse her MS. And that's exactly what she's able to do. She went from being completely bedbound to now being able to ride her bicycle and walk to work and do all the things that she was able to do before. And she was able to reverse her illness. And I was like, that's going to be me. I'm not going to let this continue. I'm going to take control of the things that I can be in control in. And what are we in control of? We're in control to an extent of what we do to our bodies and what we put into our bodies, and also how we think about ourselves. And those three things were the things that I decided to focus on when it came to addressing my MS. And so I started on the MS protocol. I learned the science. Her book is incredible because it teaches about inflammation. It teaches you the science of your cells, how your cells work, why we develop chronic illnesses. None of this was being told to me by my doctors. I had to beg them to get me a vitamin D and B test, like very, very fundamental shit. But they didn't really get why. And it was wild to me because some of even the very fundamental research around MS shows that the majority of people with MS are very vitamin D deficient. And where did I live at the time? In London, where there is no sunlight. I'm half Indian. I need sun. And I didn't have enough of it. And my vitamin D levels were low AF. So there we go. But this protocol changed my life. It absolutely radicalized the way that I started to think about my body, my health, my life. Suddenly, all of the things that I described earlier around my poor mental health, my heavy periods, my struggles with weight, all of those things suddenly made so much sense. That was the lead up to my MS. That was my body saying, alert, something's really wrong here. And I didn't know how to decipher that. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the knowledge, right? I was just a kid and nobody told me any different. It was all normalized. Even when something is normal, when it comes to our health, it doesn't make it healthy. It doesn't make it optimal. And if there's anything that I've learned from this journey, it's that I seek optimal health. I don't seek normal health because in our society today, the vast majority of people are sick. And so normal equals sick. It's not what I want for myself. So the MS protocol changed everything from Dr. Wahls. She taught me about nutritional deficiency. Oh my God, that's so hard to pronounce. Nutritional deficiencies. She taught me about nutritional deficiencies. She taught me about the importance of circadian rhythms, of sunlight, of our nervous system, of being regulated, of environmental toxins. Now, keep note that I'd been made really sick from being in a moldy student apartment, right? This was also contributing to my inflammation, right? That was leading to my MS. And so everything was making so much sense about my life. Not just all of that, but also my emotional world. I had a set of traumas from my childhood, from my teenage years, that were also contributing to my ill health. I was a people pleaser. I was in a really toxic, shitty relationship for 7 years. All of those things were contributing to my body being inflamed, to my MS proliferating. So suddenly I was seeing myself in my fullness, and I was also seeing ways that I could make actionable changes to change my life, to change my health outcomes. So the Wahls protocol was one of the first steps that I took to taking control of my health in ways that felt accessible, affordable, and relatable to me. I was learning about the science. I became obsessed with the science. This became my special interest. Now, I'm autistic. I was diagnosed only when I was 30, so late diagnosis, classic for women, sadly. And I love to dive in deep with things. That is my thing. So when I started going into health, chronic illness, understanding all the things, I just lapped it up and I haven't stopped since. I am always looking to learn, looking to understand. And this was my new thing. It ignited something in me, even though part of it was kind of exhausting because I was managing my MS, managing my life, trying to get back into work, trying to understand now after having these kind of mid-20s health crises, how do I define myself? How do I go back into a rhythm of life? This became very, very, very important. And ultimately, it completely changed the trajectory of my life, not just from a health perspective, but from the way that I viewed my existence, the way that I viewed my trajectory, my purpose. Suddenly, being a consultant in London didn't make sense anymore. It didn't matter because health mattered the most. Health was the thing that created the ability for me to experience joy, carefreeness, for me to live in the world. And so I started to radically change the way that I worked. I went into a role that was a bit more flexible, that allowed me to continue to explore myself from a health perspective, but also artistically, because one thing that came out of my concussion journey was that I started painting. And painting to me has always been important, but something that I really left behind when I entered the world of work and when I went to university, because I literally thought I was going to be a history lecturer. I cannot imagine anything worse than being an academic nowadays. Oh my God. But I came back to art, and I then saw art as a way to talk about chronic illness, as a way to highlight the stories of people who are disabled and chronically ill. And I moved into that as a career. I became an illustrator. None of that would have happened without the brain injury, without the MS. It gave me a perspective shift. It moved me into a new version of myself that prioritized different things, that saw the world differently. And so it opened up a new way of being for me. And becoming an illustrator was part of that. And it was also part of the way that I started to engage with disability justice. It became a way for me to engage with disabled communities and put specific messages out in the world to help people to understand ableism, to help people to understand disability, to help people to understand chronic illness. And I have been lucky enough to create some really incredible pieces of artwork for The Guardian, for YouTube, for Greenpeace, for amazing teams of people, amazing organizations. But the thing that really tied all of those pieces together for me, every piece of work that I did, I was interested in the impact that it would have on chronically ill and disabled people. I wanted to show our stories. I wanted to show what we looked like. I wanted to challenge stereotypes. And so that's what I started to dedicate myself to doing. And the reason I mention this is because all of that has led me to this point where I'm sitting now with you making this podcast. And it's where I've decided to leave illustration behind, not because I didn't value it or didn't love it. I absolutely did, but because I realized that the most important thing in doing that was the impact on the lives of people with chronic illnesses and disabilities. And what I realized that I really wanted to do was to focus on that. And that's why I'm here with you today on this podcast, the Why Am I Sick podcast, because I want to directly help people with chronic illnesses. I realized that that is one of the greatest callings of my life and one of the most important contributions that I can make to the world. If I can help somebody feel any level of relief in their life from the symptoms that are causing them great discomfort or great pain, that is the greatest honor to me. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. And that's where I've come from. And I'm so grateful to be here, to be creating with you. And the thing that's really important for me now is that this podcast, and when I talk to you, when I share my knowledge, it's accessible and it's relatable. Because when I have been trying to understand everything, and like I said, the Wahls protocol was a starting point, but it was a starting point in a long journey of understanding all of the things to do with chronic illness. It helped me to get started with my journey, but there has been so much more that I have learned to craft something that now I know to be a way to actually address a lot of the fundamental root causes of most chronic illnesses. And I want to be here to help people with chronic illnesses like yourself from feeling lost in all of the information and all the knowledge. I've distilled that into a few key pillars that we'll talk about again another time. But I just wanted to say that the way that I want to engage, who I am, is someone who is going to step beside you on your journey, not in front of you, not behind you, just beside you as a guide. And I think that I'm going to draw direct attention to this because I think it's true, is that in this space, I think that we are often exposed to a lot of wellness influencers who are mostly very wealthy white women in very specific environments where they have access to a lot of money. And so they're spending a lot of money on their health. They're buying all the fancy shit. They're doing like the ozone therapy. They are like dropping money on like peptides and all the stuff, right? But I want you to know that you can make really big differences in your life and in your health, and most importantly, in the quality of your life without having to drop that much money. I've been through periods where I thought that that was what I needed to do, to drop all the money to buy like all the supplements. You don't need to do that. And I'm going to show you why that's the case. I'm going to show you how you can make changes to your health without breaking your bank account. And I feel like that's so important to me because everybody deserves good health. Not just the wealthy people, not just the people with all the resources, but you, people, regular everyday people on the street. And there are things that we can do to do that. And I want to show you how. So thank you so much for joining me on this first podcast episode, just introducing myself, introducing a little bit about the kind of work that I do, where I've come from, where I'm at now, and why I want to help you. I hope that this is a long and fun journey between us. Chronic illness is hard as fuck, so why not make it a little bit humorous, a little bit more easy to understand, a little bit more digestible. I'm just going to be my full self. I'm a little bit goofy. I swear too much maybe, but that's all kind of part and parcel. And if you enjoy my content, feel free to like, share, and let me know what you're going through. Let me know your story. I'd love to connect. I'm always available. So thank you so much for joining me on the very first episode of the Why Am I Sick podcast.